In the gospel story, Jesus' command brings about the cleansing of 10 lepers. But only one, a Samaritan, returns to give thanks. Jesus is on his way to his destiny in Jerusalem. The narrative illustrates the power of the reign of God to give a new lease on life. The lepers, who were formerly outcasts, would not be allowed to return home. But only a despised Samaritan recognizes that a life of gratitude and faith is now possible. Physical healing is but a first step. He becomes whole and finds salvation. A reading from the Gospel of Luke. On the way to Jerusalem, Jesus was going through the region between Samaria and Galilee. As he entered a village, 10 lepers approached him. Keeping their distance, they called out, saying, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." When he saw them, he said to them, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were made clean. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. He prostrated himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus asked, "Were not 10 made clean? But the other 9, where are they?" When none of them found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner, then he said to him, "Get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well." The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Blessed by God's grace and enriched by our heritage, our mission is to glorify God, proclaim the love of God in Jesus Christ, and serve God's people. That is Trinity's mission statement, in case you don't remember it. I'll come back to it. In today's gospel from Luke, we hear a moving story about Jesus healing 10 lepers, 9 Jews and 1 Samaritan. Unlike many such stories, it isn't the healing that's the point of the story, but what happened around it. It is a story of an encounter with God's power and mercy. Healing and compassion are 2 things that Jesus extended to people everywhere he went as he traveled toward Jerusalem. As he was on the road toward Samaria and Galilee, he came upon a small colony of men suffering from leprosy. They were specifically identified by their illness. They were simply called lepers. We have heard of other parables about lepers in the New Testament and of their suffering. So what is leprosy, you ask? It has been described as a disease dreaded during the time of Jesus and his disciples, not because it killed people, but because people remained alive without any hope. The men with leprosy were social outcasts as well as being ill. They were required to live apart from their community and loudly cry out, "Unclean, unclean," wherever they went. They were outcasts from their communities who had gathered together as brothers for their personal safety and also to combat their isolation. Stigma is still a huge issue in today's world. In the case of these 10 men, they didn't even dare to approach Jesus to ask for his help, but stood at a distance and cried for him to have pity on them. 10 people, dressed in tattered rags, their bodies covered with lesions, crying at the top of their lungs for help. For some reason, when Jesus approached them, they did not cry out, "Unclean," as they were supposed to. Instead, they cried, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." How did they know who Jesus was? Why did they not warn him of the danger of their presence? Luke doesn't say. He only says that in answer to their plea, Jesus responded with mercy. After all, this is the nature of Jesus. to love the unlovable, to touch the untouchable, to seek out the least, the last, and the lost. He told the lepers, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." He treated the lepers the same way he treated everyone else. He did not criticize them or question them or whether they were worthy of his time and attention. When someone believed that they were cured, they had to go to a priest who would examine them and certify their healing. Jesus tells them to do so, and as they turned and went, they were cleansed. While Jesus' instruction to them was not difficult, it required that they trust him. The 10 lepers first obeyed Jesus, and then the miracle followed. We can imagine that when they saw what had happened, they leaped for joy and ran as fast as they could to the temple. And why not? They had been as good as dead, and now they were alive. They had been separated from their loved ones, and now they were to be reunited. This was a miracle of unimaginable proportions. We would have been ecstatic, and so would they. But according to Luke, one of the lepers, the Samaritan, seeing that he was healed, turned back to Jesus and praised God in a loud voice. What's unusual is not that the other 9 were well on their way to the temple, but that one did turn back to say thank you. Why did he not do as he was told? What was it about this one leper that caused him to return to the scene of the miracle to say thanks? Was he more grateful than the rest? Was he more righteous? One of the strong parental lessons of our childhood is the message, don't forget to say thank you. Do we think that this leper had better parenting than the others? Why did he not do as he was told? He was a Samaritan. Samaritans at the time were treated as mortal enemies. Generally, the Jewish attitude toward the Samaritan was pretty hateful. The Samaritans were relegated to almost subhuman status. No self-respecting Jew would have been seen befriending a Samaritan. Could it be that the Samaritan didn't rush off because he did not have a priest to go to? After all, being a Samaritan, he would not have been allowed to set foot in the temple. But he was now free to live a life of gratitude to God. He was now free to remain in the company of Jesus and say thank you. But once Jesus healed these 10, the Samaritan lost his brothers. He was now healed, but to the Jews, he was still a dog. They would not celebrate God's miracle with him. They would only celebrate with those who were a part of their group. In this story, there are 3 things that speak to us. First, Jesus told the men to show themselves to a priest while they still had leprosy. It was as they went that they were cured. That meant believing against the evidence and trusting God, even when they didn't really have grounds to do so. As they went, the evidence changed. That's almost a definition of faith, trusting in what we cannot prove. If we want everything plain and clear before we take a step of faith, it's not really faith. Faith is trust, even when we don't understand and even when the evidence is against us. It's trust that God will make it right. In this story, sadly, only one of the 10 comes back to thank Jesus, but all of them had a huge faith in God. Secondly, the one who comes back is a Samaritan. Samaritans were hereditary enemies of the Jews for various reasons. So why was he the one to come back rather than the Jews? Perhaps it was because he had a deeper sense of what had been done to him. If a Jewish miracle worker healed Jews, it was wonderful, but so he should. For him to heal a Samaritan was going above and beyond. It was entirely grace and favor. If you don't believe you deserve to be saved, and God saves you anyway, you will be deeply, deeply grateful. Christians who have been going to church for years and years probably think of themselves as good people. And with all of this comes a sense of entitlement. In some way, we deserve to be blessed by God. But this story reminds us that it's those who are most conscious of what has been done for them that are closest to the heart of God. Thirdly, it speaks of God's grace to everyone. The men's healing does not depend on them coming back to say thanks. Jesus heals them anyway. It's not as if the healing of the other 9 would be miraculously withdrawn because they didn't return. God does a lot of things for everyone, whether they acknowledge it or not. There are many people who are not Christians but who are still blessed. At one level, Christians ought to be the people who acknowledge what God has done for them and turn back and say thank you. There is a grace that God gives to everyone. Whether we are Christians or not, we can take pleasure in family, in creation, in love, and in friendship. These gifts are unconditional. They don't depend on us acknowledging God as our Savior, although they may be enriched by it. Luke's gospel fits wonderfully with the story of Naaman in today's Old Testament lesson. Similarly, he was a man who suffered from leprosy, as did the 10 in Luke's gospel, but he was also a commander of the king of Aram, a faithful warrior, held in very high esteem, the opposite of the poor 10 lepers. As the 10 did, he also wanted relief from his terrible illness. The differences in these two stories are striking. A commander in the army, Naaman had a staff of servants, and he truly wanted to be cured of leprosy. He was very able and willing to pay a great deal to the king of Israel if his illness could be reversed. The exact opposite life experience of the 10 lepers in Luke's gospel, who were social outcasts. So Naaman pulls up in the front of Elisha's house with all his power and money and expecting Elisha to come out and help him. But Elisha sends a messenger with a very simple message. Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh will be restored, and you shall be clean. A pretty simple and easy thing to do, but Naaman became very angry, thinking that Elisha would go out and see him and cure him on the spot. Believing that because he was of a privileged class, he should have been shown more respect by the prophet. He wanted a personal encounter with God through Elisha. So he was doubtful, and he feared that his trip had been a waste of time. Naaman did not know how to graciously receive the assistance being offered to him. Fortunately, it was one of his servants who convinced him to willingly follow the simple directions that had been given. Putting his pride aside, he listens to his servants, follows Elisha's instruction, and is healed. In the moment of his healing, Naaman confesses before Elisha that there is no other God in all the earth except in Israel. He fully expresses his gratitude as the one leper did. Part of Trinity's mission statement says that we are to serve God's people. Our Christian belief leads us to, first, see who needs our help in our current community, as Jesus saw those who were in his community and helped them. And secondly, maybe more importantly, respond to those in our community crying out for help. Jesus is calling on us to respond to his manner that he did. Let us be willing to see those who need us and extend a hand to anyone suffering with pain, fear, or hunger. Let's open our hearts as Jesus did and remind them of his love. Jesus, the one who makes no distinction of nationality or clan as he seeks to provide comfort and love to a hurting world. As Jesus cares, present tense, for all his people, the lepers, the outcasts, and the foreigners, and us as well. So should we. Our faith should tell us that this is what we are to do. Trinity has always given generously to our many outreach programs such as the Crop Walk for Hunger, our food pantry, the Thanksgiving food bags, the Easter baskets for the Grace Smith House, and other organizations that supply help to whoever needs it. Seeing all who need help in whatever type and in following in Jesus' steps, responding with help and compassion to those in our community and beyond who need us to help them. And when we cry out ourselves for help, will we be like the 9 and go on our merry ways because things now look good for us? Or will we be as the stranger who returned to Jesus after mercy was shown and fall at his feet with thanksgiving and gratitude for all he has done for us? As we give thanks at the rapidly approaching Thanksgiving Day next month, instead of giving our single day alone, let's remember to give thanks every single day. May our gratitude be an expression of our faith and make us well. Blessed by God's grace and enriched by our heritage, our mission is to glorify God, proclaim the love of God in Jesus Christ, and serve God's people. Amen.